Hi everybody, I am now going to do a video about how to do a bit further maintenance on a chromatic harmonica. In one of my previous videos I've explained how to look after it normally without having to take it apart. I've also explained that you can't take every chromatic harmonica apart, so you have to be careful. One of the things I want to discuss here is to take the mouthpiece off. This is the mouthpiece, or in another chromatic harmonica, this is your mouthpiece that lies on top of the body of the harmonica. So that's the body, and there's your mouthpiece on the top. And on every chromatic harmonica you can actually take the mouthpiece off, so it doesn't really matter what chromatic harmonica you've got. On every chromatic you can take the mouthpiece off. Very useful. Obviously, because if a harmonica gets dirty, then the mouthpiece would be the first zone, so to speak, where all your dirty stuff goes into. So cleaning the mouthpiece is very, very helpful. Just before you start anything, the magic word here is just be careful. Just common sense. Don't do anything silly. What I would also recommend is, because in the mouthpiece of most harmonicas there is some tiny little bits, and we'll come to that later when I take this off, but just to make sure you don't lose them, what I would do is just take a bowl, put it in front, make sure you've got enough workspace, an empty table in front of you, put it in a bowl and take the harmonica apart above the bowl, so anything that jumps out will go into the bowl or a tray or whatever it is. Just be careful not to lose any parts. Just common sense really. So I'm now going to take the mouthpiece off my Suzuki tremolo chromatic. As you can see in all chromatics, the mouthpiece is attached with the screws. Here's a screw on either end. Yep. So there's screws on either end. Basically, get yourself a cheap miniature screwdriver set. You can get them anywhere. This one's from B&Q for a couple of pounds. Just a couple of crosshead screwdrivers, a flat one, whatever you want. Just a cheap little set. Anything will do. You don't have to have an expensive super duper screwdriver set or anything. So just a couple of quid. So here we go. And again, I'll do this above the bowl, so if anything falls out, it will fall in the bowl and I won't lose it. Excuse me. So the first thing you do is to undo those two mouthpiece screws. The name says it all. What I usually do is to keep the harmonica upside down and again above the bowl, so if anything falls off, excuse me, it will fall into the bowl and I won't lose it, or a tray or whatever you're using. So the mouthpiece screws come off first, so this one on either side, this one and that one. So I'm going to do that. The mouthpiece, and while I'm doing this I'm going to just keep on talking. The mouthpiece can consist of 2 or more parts. It depends on what type and brand of harmonica you've got. Some Suzuki harmonicas only have 2 pieces, like a mouthpiece and a slider, but on most chromatic harmonicas you will find a few more pieces, and when I get this apart I will get to those and I'll explain to you what they are. Right, I've now got the screws loose. So what happens now is that the whole mouthpiece will come off the harmonica. It will come off altogether. Let's see if I've done the screws all right. Right, so the mouthpiece comes off. Here goes a screw already, which is just fallen into my bowl, and that's absolutely perfect. And I've just made the classic mistake. Right, so the mouthpiece is off. So we're going to do first is clean the mouthpiece itself. Now this one and it's not necessarily on every chromatic harmonica, but definitely on this one, is, just a second, bear with me, there we are. Right, the mouthpiece itself, that's the one you see on the outside in front of the harmonica. And then of course you've got the slider. The slider just slots into the mouthpiece. Yeah, the slider slots into the mouthpiece like that, and it slides within. And then on this particular harmonica I've also got what's called a back plate. So this particular harmonica, the slider assembly as it's called, consists of 3 pieces. So a back plate, the slider, and then the mouthpiece itself. Why is this back plate there? And this occurs on most chromatic harmonicas, especially the older ones. The back plate goes straight onto the comb of the harmonica, and it keeps the slider. So the slider goes on top of that, and it keeps the slider from rubbing directly on the comb of the harmonica. Okay. Again, common sense, and be careful. The slider and the back plate are both need to be completely straight. So don't bend it, don't or anything else. Again, be careful. It needs to be perfectly straight. If you bend it or you drop it or anything else, it could be a case of having to redesign it or buy a new plate. Obviously that's not what you want to do. So in this case, again, the slider assembly, as it's called, consists of 3 pieces. In those 3 pieces, they are screwed onto the harmonica with, of course, the mouthpiece screws. Here is my mouthpiece screws. And then we get to those little tiny parts that I was on about, that you don't want to lose. And what they are is 2 little silicone, like a bit of rubber, little tiny rings. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can find this. On the top, on the screw head, right there, there's a little rubber ring. See that? And of course, that ring just moves and it can go out. These rings can easily fall out of the harmonica when you take the mouthpiece off, and you do not want to lose these. What these rubber silicone rings are actually doing is they sit in the slot around the screw, and the slider, because you move the slider all the time back and forth by pressing the button, the hole in the slider just hits the screw every time. And every time, if you don't have these rings, you hear it clicking, because it's metal against metal. So when you push the slider and you haven't got those silicone rings around the screws, the harmonica will start to make really strange noises that you don't want. So very important, and again, when you take it apart, make sure you don't lose these tiny little silicone rings. You can hardly see them. They're very tiny and they're very important. Right, so when you then take the harmonica apart, you just clean all the parts with a bit of water. I wouldn't use cleaning agent or anything like that, because don't forget, anything you do here has to go in your mouth. Right, so you don't want to use anything that's not safe to put in your mouth, no matter what it is. So just clean it all with a bit of water, with a cloth, and then just clean it to the best of your ability. You can use any kind of a little cloth or a environmentally disposable cotton bud, you know, because this is a big issue these days. But cotton buds, they work fine. Just a little ball of cotton, and etc. So you can polish it, you can clean it, you can do anything with it, and you just spend a bit of time on it and just get it all clean. the next thing what you can do is to actually lubricate all the parts, so it makes it easier to use a slider. Now this is always a controversial subject. Many harmonica players don't want to use any kind of lubricant, and most harmonica players will advise you just to use water. Now what I use personally, and that is something that I got advised by a German harmonica player, is to use jojoba oil. If you use any oil, make sure the oil is not poisonous. Again, anything you put on your mouthpiece will get in touch with your mouth, so don't use anything that's not safe. What I use is jojoba oil. I've got it here in a little tube, but you can buy it at Holland & Barrett or any kind of chemist or anything. You want to use just a little bit of jojoba oil, jojoba oil, however you pronounce it, doesn't really matter. And all you need is a little drop, not more than that, just a little drop on the surfaces. And eventually when you put it all back together, it all helps, and your harmonica will feel as new, and it will just, the slider will just move all the way across without any problems whatsoever. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to clean it, oil it a little bit, and then I'll come back to you when I'm ready to put it back together. Thank you. Right, I'm back now. So what I've done is I've cleaned my slider assembly, and I've also cleaned the front of the harmonica, so the comb, basically the bit where the mouthpiece goes on top of. When you put it all back, you need to look, again, it's just common sense, just need to look at the front of your harmonica, and you need to know which side is the slider going to go, so which is the right hand side of your harmonica, which is the left hand side. You can either see it by the cover plates, so the one cover plate on the top has got usually the brand logo on it and all sorts of other things. Another way to look at it, where the right side is to find out where the slider pin, the slider spring is assembled, so that's where the button should go. If you can't see anything else, then just blow into it and see where the low notes and the high notes are, because obviously where the high notes are, that's where the button should go. Okay, so make sure you put it right together. If you look at the mouthpiece as well, just at the slider, sorry, the back plate, you can see that on one side it's got a screw hole, and on the other side there's a little slot here at the top. That is where the slider spring should move back and forth. So also on this piece you can see which one is the right side and which is the left side, or whichever you want to see it. So very important to put it back in the right way, don't put it the wrong way around, etc. So the first piece that goes on back on the harmonica again is the back plate, because again the back plate just keeps the slider from rubbing on the harmonica comb. Do you remember what the back plate does? So put the back plate onto the comb, make sure the slider spring is in the right slot. So there you go, there you don't go. So the slider spring is in the correct slot, so it can move back and forth in the plate. Okay, so the back plate first. If you haven't got a back plate, then obviously you go straight onto the slider. Some harmonicas don't come with back plates. On the slider it's a bit more difficult to see. Obviously you know which side goes where just by looking at the button on one side, but what's more difficult is where the slider spring is going, and you'll see that at the end of the harmonica there's a hole there for the slider spring. The hole isn't on that side, so that keeps you from putting it upside down. Okay, so the hole, the spring of the slider, so the little pin of the slider spring there should fit exactly into this little hole in the slider. So you put the slider on and make sure that the spring, I don't know if you can see it there, it's a bit too close. So the slider spring goes into the hole in the slider itself. Okay? And now you get to the point where you find that your slider is sticking out too far, because obviously the slider spring is not under tension at the moment, so it's at the most right hand side, because this is how you move the slider. You see the slider spring, sorry, moves along when you move the slider. There, just there, see it? So that means that when you assemble it, you have to push the slider in to open the screw hole to put your screw in, because that's where the screw goes later on. Okay, so back plate, slider, or if you haven't got a back plate, just a slider. Make sure it goes over the spring. And then also on the mouthpiece, you look on the inside of the mouthpiece and you will see that one end is different from the other end. That piece is just straight with only a screw hole on one side, but if you look on the other side, hey, there's a bit more going on there. There's a slot there, there's a recess, there's a screw, and there's a, sorry, I hope you can see this properly. That is where the slider spring just moves back and forth inside the mouthpiece. What you'll also find in most mouthpieces for chromatic harmonica is that the mouthpiece is actually slightly bent. Let me show you this. I don't know if you can see this, but the mouthpiece is going in a bend like that. I'm sure you can see this in the video. Why is that? Most harmonica manufacturers make the mouthpiece in that way deliberately. Why? Because when you put it on the mouthpiece and you screw the both sides in, it just straightens itself and it keeps more tight onto the harmonica body. You can imagine that the slider is where the harmonica needs to be airtight. So the slider assembly is quite important, that you don't lose any air blowing through in out the hole, out of the side, or anything like that. So that's why these mouthpieces are made slightly in a bend like that, so when you put it on, it puts more pressure onto the harmonica body. Right, so on that case we go and find, so you put the back plate on here, and this can be quite fiddly. The slider, and again make sure that the spring goes into the correct hole, and then you put the mouthpiece on. And the easiest way to start on the left hand side, so where the slider is not touching. So the left hand side, the plain end of the mouthpiece where you only need to put a screw in. So you put that screw in first, but very gently, don't tighten it, okay? So we're going to do that now. When you put the screw in, and again this is where these silicone rings come in very handy. So you put the screw, sorry, I don't know if you can see this, the screw into the mouthpiece hole. So that's there. The screw goes in there, and at the back, so there, that is where the little silicone rings are going. So you take a little silicone ring, and you put it, where am I? So there's a screw, silicone ring, and you put the ring over the end of the screw, like that. Right? When you then put it on, make sure that the ring doesn't escape. Yeah, so you want to, if the ring isn't quite tight, make sure again you do that above your tray. If anything falls off, you still got it, because if these rings get lost and they're on your carpet somewhere, forget it, you can't find them. They just disappear like snow for the sun. Right, so the screw goes in, the ring goes out the other end, and then you put the mouthpiece, the one end, the plain end, onto the harmonica, and it just goes slots in there, like that, and then screw it on with the screwdriver, not too tight, loosely, as long as it's attached. So now it's loose, but it's still attached. The screw is actually gripping. Now this end is loose, obviously, because that's the last screw you do. And as I said before, the slider spring is not under tension at the moment. So what you need to do is you do the same here. So you put the screw in, put the ring underneath the screw, then put it all in. But at the same time when you do that, you have to push the slider. So that's where it gets a bit fiddly. Some harmonicas will work differently. Not every harmonica works like this one, but you just have to be careful, and it can be quite fiddly. So what I'm going to do now is take the next screw and my silicone ring, and if you've done the other side loosely, you can still move this. See it? You can move it. Okay, so you can do this quite easily. Just lift it, and just like you did on the other end, put the screw in, put the ring on the other end. So that's what I'm going to do now. Screw in, and the silicone ring. Again, this is where it can get a bit fiddly. There I am. So I've got the screw in with the ring around it, and now I need to find the screw that goes into the screw hole. So to do that, put your harmonica on a flat surface on the table, press the slider button slightly, and then the screw should just automatically fall into the correct hole. It doesn't, so I have to do this again. Not very interesting to watch this part, I suppose, but there you go. It's just the part that you find yourself doing as well when you do this yourself. Right. Start again. Put the screw in. Silicone ring around the screw. Have I done it? Yes, I have. And then eventually screw it in, also loosely, please. Don't over tighten it. And now the mouthpiece is back on the harmonica again. So your screws on both ends are quite loose. Now what you're going to do is tighten them up, but not too tight. Test it out, because you still want the slider button to move in and out. Some newer harmonicas have sorted this problem out, so you can tighten that up as tight as you like and nothing will happen. like a Zeidel, for instance. Zeidel is very good at this. But most harmonicas, you just have to be very careful. Don't over tighten it, because if you do it too tight, the slider will stop moving. So now it's a case of fiddle around, see how far you can tighten it with the slider still moving. I'm going to do that now, and I'll be back in a minute. Here we are. Now the mouthpiece is all tightened up enough, but the slider is still moving. And strangely enough, when you've done it properly, you've put the little silicone rings around the screws on the inside, you won't hear the slider. Because if you forgot the rubber rings, it'll make a tickling noise, because every time the slider hits the screw on the inside, not only will it damage your screw over time, but it also makes a very strange clicking noise, which you don't want. So the slider moves freely. You can't hear the slider. I've also put a little bit of lubrication on the back plate, on the slider, on the inside of the mouthpiece. Again, I use jojoba oil. Most harmonica players will advise you to just use water. If you do use oil, make sure it's odorless. You don't want to smell it. Tasteless, so you don't want to taste the oil. And of course, it has to be non-toxic, and it's got to be safe to eat, because eventually you get it in your mouth, whether you like it or not. What I use is jojoba oil. Feel free to use anything else, but make sure. And also jojoba oil, that's the last thing I want to say about this, doesn't crumble. Because some vegetable oils, when it gets cold, it starts to crumble, and you get little crumbles inside the harmonica. Jojoba oil doesn't crumble. It doesn't smell, it doesn't taste, and it's safe to be in contact with your mouth in any way. But again, most harmonica players will just tell you to use water. Water works fine. You just might have to use it a little bit more often than you do it with water. But it works perfectly, and it just makes the whole harmonica feel like new again. It really does. What's also a good tip, if you have problems with playing the chromatic harmonica and you get problems with your mouth, lip reaction, your lips rubbing on the mouthpiece or anything like that, it's also a good idea to use the same jojoba oil and put a little drop on the tip of your finger and just rub it on your lips before you start playing. Works an absolute treat. It really does, I promise you. And again, it's safe to use. Anyway, said enough now about jojoba oil. This was a tip I got a few years ago. I saw it on a video from René Giesen, a German composer, conductor and harmonica player. Great guy, and he gave me this tip a few years ago, and it really works. Anyway, that's how to take the mouthpiece off, clean the mouthpiece. Without the rest of the harmonica. The mouthpiece can be taken off any chromatic harmonica. Even the ones with a wooden comb, you can still take the mouthpiece off and do the same, but I just demonstrate it. If you take the whole harmonica apart, what you would do is take the cover plates off first, then put the mouthpiece back on, and then eventually put the cover plates on so they make tight against the mouthpiece. That's what you would normally do, but you can only do that if you take the whole harmonica apart, and you just can't do that with a harmonica like this. So it's just a mouthpiece that you can clean, nothing else. Do what you can. I hope this video helps, and I've just found that I've now got a problem with my comb in this harmonica. I put the mouthpiece on and now the comb is broken, so I've got a problem here. I'm going to sort that out now. Thanks very much for watching. I hope this helps. Thanks. Bye.